Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ThinkEquity Conference. The next presentation will be by Adial Pharmaceuticals. Presenting is Cary Claiborne. Adial Pharmaceuticals is can't read it. Clinically staged pharmaceutical.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, let me remind you that Adial is a publicly traded company on NASDAQ. I will include certain forward-looking statements in this presentation, so I encourage you to review our risk factors on file with the SEC. As he mentioned, Adial Pharmaceuticals is a clinical development stage company focused on treating addiction and related illnesses. Our lead focus is on alcohol use disorder, or AUD. AUD is a huge public medical need. It's estimated to affect over 30 million patients a year. It's the leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 49. It contributes to over 200 different diseases, and it costs the U.S. economy an estimated $250 billion a year. Now, despite those enormous costs, less than 7% of people are estimated to seek any treatment, and even less are expected to seek treatment for medical treatment. The reason so few patients seek treatment is because, frankly, the treatments that are available aren't very good. And there are a number of barriers as to why those patients don't seek any treatment. There's an abstinence barrier, because most of the treatments that are available, in fact, all the treatments that are available in the United States, require a patient to be abstinent first, which means they have to stop drinking before they can take any kind of medication. There's an efficacy barrier where once a patient tries to go abstinent, which means first they have to stop drinking, which means they go through alcohol withdrawal, then they have to maintain a certain lifestyle. If you think about someone trying to maintain abstinence, it requires a radical change in their lifestyle. You have to avoid family and friends that may be triggers that may cause you to want to drink. You have to stay away from social events where alcohol is being served. And think about, have you ever been to a social event where alcohol wasn't being served? So that's a major challenge for people that want to maintain abstinence. Now, it works for a few, but about 90% of people that try abstinence don't achieve it over the long term. There's a side effect barrier. So even if a patient goes through alcohol withdrawal, maintains abstinence, and starts a medical treatment, there's significant physical and mental side effects associated with the medications that are on the market today. Such things as vomiting, abdominal pain, certain mental illnesses. So because the patients that even try it don't stay on it very long because they can't tolerate the medication. And frankly, the last thing is these treatments aren't very easy to use. I mentioned that the challenges with abstinence. That's a major issue. And then some of the medications on the market, such as Vivitrol, is a painful injection you have to take in your backside once a month. Not very pleasurable to go through. So for all those reasons, that's why there are so few patients that are actually seeking a treatment with medication for alcohol use disorder. Our research has shown us what patients don't want. As I mentioned, they don't want side effects. They don't want painful injections. They don't want to sit around in a self-help group in a circle talking about their problems. What they do want is to be able to take their drinking down to a level that's in moderation. And the data's shown that it's really the heavy drinking that causes the problems. It causes the physical problems. You think about someone that drinks too much or binge drinks, that's where bad things happen. They get into car accidents. There's physical abuse. There's domestic violence. All those are problems associated with the heavy drinking, not the drinking in moderation. So we believe that our drug, ADO4, is designed to meet the market need for what patients are looking for. It's a novel mechanism of action. It's a serotonin 3 blocker. And what serotonin 3 is believed to do is to impact the dopamine reward system in the brain. So it works in the brain. And what it does, it limits your cravings and impulsivity to drink. And if you know anything about addiction, that's the big driver with most addictive behavior. It's the cravings and the impulse to do it. Our drug is going to be indicated to reduce drinking. So a big difference with our drug is you can still drink. It's designed to lower your drinking from heavy drinking down to drinking in moderation. And that's where the doctors and experts believe the real problem is. It's not with the moderate drinking. It's got a good safety profile because our drug is a repurposed drug of ondansetron that's been on the market for over 30 years. So it's got an excellent safety profile because of that. It's an oral dose taken twice a day, so there's no injection or anything like that. Very easy for patients to take and tolerate. And the last thing that's really probably the most important thing is our drug is really a precision medication. So it's going to have a companion diagnostic that's based on a genetic test. And if you have a certain genotype, our data has shown that patients with those genotypes, this drug seems to be really effective in helping them to drink less. If you don't have one of those genotypes, you won't be a candidate for the drug. We think that's going to be a major differentiator for us. A little bit more on the drug. I mentioned it's a repurposed drug. It's ADO4 is an ultra-low dose of ondansetron. Now, ondansetron has been on the market, as I said, since 1991 under the brand name of Zofran for the treatment of nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy. So because of that, it's got a long-term excellent safety profile, and because our dose is so low, we have very few side effects for patients that were in our studies. We've done a phase 2b study and a phase 3 study. The last study, our phase 3 study, was a 300-patient study. Now, we missed the overall endpoint for the total patients in the study, but we did subgroup analysis after the fact. And for certain patients with certain genotypes, ADO4 performed extraordinarily well. And I'll get more into that in a few minutes. I mentioned the genetic tests. It's a very simple PCR-based genetic test. And we think this is really going to drive more patients seeking treatment and more patients staying on treatment. And our research with doctors has shown what they've told us is what typically happens when a patient's in, we've all been there, we've had our physical, they take our blood work, we fill out our questionnaire, and now the doctor says when they see that a patient's increased their drinking, they bring that up. And they say, I noticed you've been drinking more than in the past. And normally the patient gets very defensive and says, wait a minute, that's not, why are we talking about this? I don't have a problem, that's somebody else. And that's usually where the conversation stops. And what they've said now with this genetic test as a companion diagnostic, they say the same thing, but then they add, there's a test we could give you. And based on certain genotypes, we may have a drug that can help you lower your drinking. And they believe that the patient will all of a sudden not be defensive and say, that's pretty interesting. I would like to learn more about that. Because what it does, it takes it away from a behavioral issue for the patient to more of a medical issue. Maybe there's something going on medically. Maybe there's even something going on in my family history, in my genetic profile that's causing the issue. So the doctors believe that's going to open the door to a lot more patients considering treatment. Now, the other factor here is the insurers love this idea of a genetic test because what it does is going to ensure greater efficacy because the way it'll work is if you take the test and you have a certain genotype, you're a candidate for the drug. And the data already shows that it should be effective. So the insurers like that because it says, I'm only going to reimburse for patients that have that genotype, and it should work. They hate to reimburse for drugs that don't work. So we think that's going to drive more compliance and more uptake potentially with patients. I mentioned some of the other drugs on the market. Here, this slide just takes a snapshot of the other treatments that are available in the United States. And if you go down the list of what we believe are the key characteristics to make a drug successful, such as novel mechanism of action, oral dosing, designed to reduce heavy drinking, you don't have to be abstinent to be on it or stay on it, and genetic targeting, you'll see that ADO4 is the only drug on the list that checks all those boxes. Now, just to touch on a few of the ones, Antabuse, the drug on the far right, is designed to be a significant deterrent to drinking. So if you're on that drug, which means you've already went through serious withdrawal and you're abstinent and you're on the drug, if you get even a sip of alcohol in your system, you have a violent reaction. You have nausea, vomiting, body aches, Sometimes it's so severe that patients have to go to the hospital. So if you think about that, how many people can volunteer to be on a drug like that? Another drug, Vivitrol, the one I mentioned before, again, that's a painful injection. You have to go to the doctor once a month and get. You also have to be abstinent. You have to also go through withdrawal to be on it. So we feel like AD04 fits nicely in terms of what's missing in the market today.
The barriers to entry, if you go back to the last one, because Celencro is close to you.
Yes, but
Migrate to, what's the barrier to entry?
So Celencro is not approved in the United States, and they don't have any intellectual IP, so there's no plans to launch that in the United States. It's just in Europe. And it has significant side effects. So even the patients that are on it in Europe typically don't stay on it. A lot of our study, as I was about to talk about, was done in Europe, and a lot of physicians that were in our study also use Celencro. And they say their patients complain about it because the side effects are so bad. So to touch on our phase 3 study, it was a 300-patient study. It was done in Europe. It was based on two things: a genetic profile. So we enrolled patients based on 4 genotypes. We also stratified the patients based on how much they drank. 2 categories: very heavy drinkers, which mean on days they drank at least 10 drinks or more. The average was probably around 16. So very, very heavy drinkers. Or heavy drinkers, still drinking a lot, but they drank 6 to 10 drinks on days that they drank. The heavy drinkers represent about 63% of the patients in the study. As I mentioned, we missed the overall endpoint for the study with the overall patient population. But what we've done since then is we drilled down into the study and really looked at it based on drinking level and genotype. And this slide takes a look at the 4 genotypes that were in the study. You see that in the bottom right: AG, LLTT, AC, and GG. And you'll see that the AG genotype met statistical significance. The GG genotype didn't quite get there, but we believe, based on what we saw, the way it was trending, that if we extended the study longer and enrolled more patients, because that was a relatively small patient population of just 24 patients, that may have a chance of getting to significance. But going forward, what we're going to do is do another study with just the AG group and the heavy drinker combination. We took all this data to FDA, reviewed it with FDA. They found it very supportive. Of course, they can't approve something based on an analysis that was done after the fact. We have to do it again in a study. And we think the best chance for success will be to do the study with just the AG group, which still represents a fairly sizable population of patients, and do it again and prove it. What's really encouraging for us is, based on that meeting, the FDA agreed on what the primary endpoint should be to approve an AUD drug in the United States. And that endpoint is called a responder analysis, which is a patient in a 6-month study. The last 2 months of that study, month 5 and 6, that patient can't have one day. They can't have one day where they're considered a heavy drinker. And for a man, that is 5 drinks. And for a woman, it's 4 drinks in a day. So if they go through the whole last 2 months without one, so they can drink, they just can't hit that heavy drinking level, then that qualifies as a primary endpoint. And what's exciting for us is that in the phase 3, this is based on that endpoint. We know the AG group hit it. We also went back and looked at the phase 2B study we did, looked at the same data, and it hit it again. So we've hit it twice, which gives us a lot of confidence that it just wasn't a one-time thing. And that's why we're moving forward that way. The next major catalyst for us is we announced a pharmacokinetic study earlier this year, back in May. And that's a study that's part of the package that's required. Anytime you do a repurposed drug, you have to compare it to the reference drug on the market, which is Zofran, or the generic version of Zofran. You do a comparison for things like bioavailability, how it's uptaked in the body, what the right dosing regimen should be. We're in the midst of that study. We expect to report top-line results on that study in the 4th quarter of this year. So very soon we'll be reporting out on that. It's designed to optimize our study elements. It's a key part of the package that we'll be taking to FDA later to finalize what our phase 3 study should look like. So really excited about that. 2024 has been a very active year for us. We made a lot of progress in advancing AD04 to phase 3 with FDA. We completed over $8.6 million in gross financings this year in a very challenging capital market. We secured 4 new patents. We also filed a new patent that will, if approved, will take our IP out to 2044, which will give us a long length of protection. And as I mentioned, we launched a pharmacokinetic study, which is going to be a key driver for us going forward. So our next steps are to finalize our plans to potentially get to be in a position to commercially launch AD04 by 2027. We're going to complete the pharmacokinetic study and report out on that. Take that data, combine it with our plans on our phase 3, take that to FDA, get them to agree on the study design, make a final decision on whether we need to do 1 phase 3 study or 2. 2 may give us our greatest chance of success, where if you just did 1, FDA would wait and see what that data looks like, and then they would tell you if it was good enough. But if you do 2 and you hit their preferred way to do things, that would eliminate that risk. So we're going to make a final decision on that. And then we're continuing to advance discussions with potential partners. We would love to have a partner collaborate with us, where essentially the way we prefer it to work is they would fund the phase 3 studies in return for commercial rights to launch AD04. So those discussions have been ongoing, and they're actively watching and waiting to see what the pharmacokinetic study looks like, because they know it's a key part of the package for FDA. So those are ongoing. I want to touch a little bit on the total addressable market. Now, these are some big numbers, but this is, if you assume 20% of the patients that are estimated out there to suffer from AUD, and 20% are the AG genotype and that GG genotype, which we may study down the road. But if you have both of those, that would be 20% of that 30 million potential patient number. And if you got all those patients, of course, we're not saying you did, but just to put orders of magnitude on this, if you got all those patients, that would be a $40 billion market. Now, I said before, only 7% of those estimated patients are seeking any kind of treatment. So if you got just those patients, that would be $3.4 billion market. And if you just got a slice of that slice, we think AD04 would be a very successful drug. So just to put it in perspective for you. And that's really the low-hanging fruit. So just to summarize and wrap up, we believe we built a very strong development stage company focused on alcohol use disorder. We've been advancing the ball, moving forward with FDA. We're looking forward to having those discussions and moving to the next stage so that we can bring a product to market to help the millions of people that are suffering from alcohol use disorder. Longer term, we think there are potential expansion opportunities for AD04 based on our patents that are already out there for things like opiate use disorder, obesity, and other things. You think about, as I mentioned, the way the drug works, it lowers cravings and impulse. And there are a lot of addictions that are driven by cravings and impulses. So we think long term, there's a lot of potential there. But we are today focused on alcohol use disorder. I've got a great experienced team that's going to help us get there, and I look forward to giving you updates on our progress in the future. So now I think we have some time for some questions.
Given the market size, how come Big Pharma hasn't already solved this? Like, what's going on? Is the market just not big enough still for Big Pharma to get in?
It's a really good question. I think a lot of Big Pharma isn't focused on addiction. There are very few companies that are. My former company, Indivior, is probably the leader in addiction, and they're focused on opiate use disorder. They're interested in alcohol use disorder. Big Pharma just typically is not played in the market. Part of it is, especially for alcohol use disorder, there really haven't been good breakthrough drugs, I think, that, as I talked about with all the issues out there, that have really allowed it to take off.
So you could get acquired after you roll everything out, you could be a target acquisition by big pharma.
Potentially, a lot of big pharma strategy is wait and see.
Yeah.
Why take the risk, but pay more? I've been told by potential partners, I'm willing to pay more later than pay less now. Doesn't always make economic sense, but that's sometimes a strategy.
Do your timeline again for 24, 25, 26?
Well, ideally, 24, report out on the PK study. 25, first half, get with FDA, get approval on what the study design looks like, launch the study. The last study took 2 years, but that was during the pandemic. So ideally, we could get that next study done in a shorter time frame than 2 years, but we don't know until we get there, and then seek approval at that point. Any other questions?
Is it correct that the patient is taking ether for that effectively they just won't drink as much, right? Is that really what's happening?
That's really it. You hit it right on the head, Mark, that it's designed to lower your drinking. So patients still drink, and that's why it's a desirable product, because they don't have to go totally abstinent. Some patients will if that's their goal, but it's really designed to lower the amount they drink.
Also, sort of a follow-up to that, we can talk more about this later, but with sort of the GLP-1 drugs, right, and where you have, you're still going to eat, obviously, right?
Right.
That's something you do, right? But you're just going to eat less because you feel full faster. I mean, it's a similar, concept or mechanism of action.
It's similar. Again, it works in the brain. So if your brain, we've all had cravings for certain things, right? So the more you crave, the more you do. If it takes away that craving and the impulse. A lot of issues happen with just impulse eating, impulse shopping, impulse drinking. So by lowering that, impulsivity, you just do it less. And then, there's, with addiction, there's also psychosocial counseling that goes along with that. So it depends on what the person's needs are. Some people want to stop drinking. Some just want to get it under control and get their life back.
In your range of target area that you're talking about here, you said it's for 21 to 40? Age group of users or
No,
patients?
it'll be for adults. So pediatric indication could be down the road, but anyone over 18 would be target. All right. Well, thank you very much.